It's no surprise to anyone, but currently the biggest question mark in our community is how will gene therapy be paid for? It's certainly daunting, don't you think? A multi-million-dollar treatment that is administered just once, and we have no idea how long the benefits will last. It seems to be different patient to patient. How will a payer justify that? Well, I'm pleased to say our guest today has some pretty encouraging answers to all of this. I sat down with Jim Kenny, who is the founder of a managed care pharmacy consulting practice. Jim has worked for Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare for 38 years in pharmacy management, most recently as the manager of specialty and pharmacy contracts. His work included benefit design, formulary management, pipeline monitoring, trend analysis, legislative tracking, sales presentations, and rebate contracting. I say all this because I just wanted you to know that Jim is the man. He also has experience in multiple plan designs, including commercial, Medicare Part D, managed Medicaid, and healthcare exchanges, which is important to us in the hemophilia community. And I should mention he has worked extensively in areas of specialty pharmacy programs, including hemophilia. The one thing Jim stressed in our conversation is that when it comes to gene therapy, the patient is in the driver's seat. So do yourself a favor and settle in for the next 7 minutes. Jim's going to give us an overview of how gene therapy is being reimbursed today, and it's happening, and it's working, I should mention. Patients are having access to these therapies, and also what the future of our reimbursement system is heading for. All this and more on this month's It's a Whole New World, a gene therapy segment. This segment is brought to you by CSLBehring, a global biotherapeutics leader focused on serving the rare disease community by providing innovative therapies. They now have a first-of-its-kind treatment for hemophilia B. To learn more about this treatment option, visit beyondhemb.com and download the B Support app from the App Store or Google Play to stay up to date on relevant information and to manage your treatment journey.
Yeah, gene therapy is really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of excitement around gene therapy. I think the biggest challenge you have is the reimbursement process today. The problem is, from a administrative perspective, is someone has to buy the product. So now a plan could say, well, we'll cover that. We'll cover the cost, and we'll just pay the distributor, and they can ship it to you, and you can give it to a patient, to a provider or a facility. But in a lot of cases, the payers are saying, no, it's what we would call traditionally a buy and bill situation. So all that means in the marketplace is whoever is administering the product has to buy it and then bill the plan or bill the insurance program for the product. Can be a little scary. And if I'm a provider or if I'm a HTC or a clinic that's going to administer a hemophilia gene therapy, I want to make sure that I am going to get reimbursed. And what is that reimbursement going to look like? And that whole prior authorization process, which physicians hate and patients aren't very fond of, is certainly critical for something like a gene therapy. I think ultimately at the end of the day, if the patient is appropriate, meets all the criteria, and is a candidate, they likely will have access to that gene therapy. And most of your large payers do have these products listed as covered with a prior authorization and things like that. But now, gene therapy is not without some degree of risk, and it may or may not work. And these vectors that they deliver the gene therapy, and these viral vectors, these adenovirus vectors, if you will, some patients have antibodies to the AAV vector that's used in these particular therapies. And if they do, they're going to reject the gene therapy. So that's a challenge and a concern. And I think the numbers range 50 to 60% of patients, I think, may in fact have antibodies to the AAV vector. So they're not a candidate. So that's one of the screening criteria on the front end. So that screens out some patients. But I think that's when we start talking about risk, right? If we give the product to a patient and they fail, then that's when we talk about value-based or some type of risk-based contracting on the back end to protect the payer. But ultimately, when we think about these things, it's going to be a situation where it's got to be the right patient. And if it is, then typically it's difficult to deny coverage from a payer perspective. If you have your criteria and the patient meets all the criteria, then typically you are going to cover that. In some cases with payers, what commercial payers will do is they'll play what I like to call duck, dodge, and hide, right? All in all, I mean by that is they may cover something, but you don't know that they cover it publicly. So they don't post it on their website. They don't post a policy, but if a request comes in and the patient meets criteria, they can get coverage. And that's a new strategy that some payers are employing. we won't list it on our formulary, but we will have a coverage policy that's, not listed, and we'll make the product available when patients meet criteria. So we think about gene therapy, and when I mentioned the viral vector that a patient theoretically could reject. So someone could be tested for antibodies, and the antibodies are negative, and then either the test was inaccurate, or between the time they got tested and the time the gene therapy was delivered, they reject the gene therapy. So now you've just spent $3-4 million on a product and it didn't work. So what I would want in place is a contract that said if the product fails outright, then we get a refund. So we're going to use a product, and if it doesn't perform as anticipated, or it doesn't deliver the degree of efficacy that we expected, there could be some type of value-based payment on the back end from the manufacturer back to the payer to cover the cost of all of the product or some of it. I mean, the guidance really comes down to the patient-provider conversation around this. But I think in general, it's a conversation they have with the provider, and if they certainly meet the criteria the plans require for access, then I think if their approach is reasonable, they could very well have access to that gene therapy. And certainly, it's a personal decision, obviously, but they have to have that conversation with the provider. And certainly, if they're working with an HTC, that's where the experts are. That's where the providers are. They're going to know. And you may very well have some providers who are thinking about individual patients who they would see as perfect candidates for something like this, because maybe they can't infuse. Maybe they've got problems with their veins to infuse the factor product, or they really struggle despite factor replacement. So there's opportunity there as well. But it's really, again, a conversation with the provider to say, hey, I heard about this. Do you think I'm a candidate? And then they obviously have to navigate whatever insurance system they're in, Medicaid, Medicare, commercial, health exchange, whatever it is. They're going to have to navigate that to get an approval and get access, and then coordinate that with their provider. I think the science is fascinating. I mean, when I think back to my, over my career in pharmacy, to see the extent to the science to be able to deliver individual genes and things like that is absolutely fascinating. And I think as it improves over time, I mean, the long-term benefit to the healthcare system could be significant. If we can put someone on a gene therapy, even though it may be expensive at time zero, a one and done therapy that provides, 10 years of coverage without prophylaxis is going to save the health system money. So ideally, the right mix of gene therapy and patient and product could be, a significant benefit to the healthcare system. We've just got to figure out how to incorporate them appropriately. But I think the excitement in this area of cell and gene therapy is just, off the charts, quite frankly, in terms of the potential benefit for patients. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. Find the right patient, give them the appropriate therapy, and improve their quality of life, but also improve their overall health care and general health.